Hello and welcome to my review of Shop or A Store is Born. This is a 1988 novel from Jasper Carrott. Carrott is a UK comedian, well known for his work as a TV host, and his career peaked in the late 80s and early 90s with shows like Canned Carrot, Carrot's Commercial Breakdown and The Detectives. In the 1970s he also reached the UK top 10 with his song Funky Moped. He has also written other books, but Shop or A Store is Born is the only one with a full-length narrative. Prior to embarking on a showbiz career, Carrott worked in a Birmingham department store called the Beehive. For Shop, he has moved the store to the slightly more salubrious Kensington High Street in London. Here the original owners, the Knowles brothers, local gangsters turned philanthropists, have set in place a number of rules stipulating what the store can and cannot do. Rejected are all sorts of modernisation and making a profit. The store therefore has few customers and little in the way of goods that are wanted or relevant in the 20th century. However, as real estate in London, the building itself is worth a fortune, and vultures begin to surface as the last surviving heir to the Knowles family is now very old. The book begins with a rundown of some of the characters that work in the store, segues into the history of its founding and back again. You'd do well to take notes here, given that there are some half a dozen or so characters, and each of them is given a biography of a half page or so describing them and their quirks. It is also the first indication that this novel is unnecessarily long and convoluted. For example, Mrs. Loving's dermatitis is described over half a page, but she barely appears in the novel after her introduction. The same could be said of Mr. Caffey, whose biography runs to more than 2 pages. Somewhat interestingly, Carrott observes, "It's fair to say that each employee had their own personal story that, if related to an insomniac, would remove the necessity to swallow any amount of Mogadon. Yet he doesn't seem to mind if it has the same effect on his readers." The protagonist of the novel is Eric Dunnett, the manager of the store who has a thing for old ladies and is described as a pervert in the book. He's also a racist and a crook, working in league with local gangster Mr. Big, who was short enough to be described as a dwarf more than once, which I suppose gives you some idea of the humour that you'll be dealing with here. Mr. Big wants to take over the store and profit from the real estate. First, however, Alfred Knowles, the store owner, needs to die. As he is childless, the store will not pass to his heir, as the charter stipulates, but to the church, specifically the local bishop, who is also working for Mr. Big because the gangster has pictures of him in a compromising position with a cool girl. Also along for the ride here are Mr. Big's lieutenant, Rupert the Brains, who spends most of his time correcting other people's grammar, which isn't even funny when I do it on Facebook, and Mangle, his muscle, who has a barely functioning IQ. On Alfred Knowles' birthday, the store throws a party, but Knowles is in little mood to celebrate. In fact, he intends to end his life and frame Dunnett for his death because he despises him. Eric is Alfred's nephew, being the illegitimate son of his brother Ronald, who was part of the store's management until Alfred bought him out. Ronald moved to America. Alfred had Eric adopted. Eric therefore is heir to the store, but he doesn't know it. And if Alfred's plans work, he never will. Alfred's attempts to kill himself don't go to plan, and he survives them well enough to die from exertion. Though tragically for him, at a time when Eric has a better alibi. Not a strong enough alibi that store detective and Sherlock Holmes obsessive Mrs. Marchant doesn't become suspicious. So it is, though, that the store, now without a Knowles to inherit it, is about to pass via Dunnett to the bishop, to Mr. Big, and everybody, especially those three, will be happy or at least richer. Problems come in the form of Gloria Bennett, aka Glory B, a high-flying American lawyer who tracks via Alfred's now aborted payments to his brother's estate an unwitting heir in Kelsey Ringwood, another of Ronald Knowles' illegitimate sons. Kelsey is an idiot, normally a salesman. He has such poor impulse control, he's a consumer extreme, buying tons of worthless trash until he is stopped by Jake, another character the novel could manage just fine without. His skill set is that he is in computers, and much is made of his hacking abilities. However, the closest thing that has to an impact on the plot is when he programs the animatronics for the store's Christmas display. Their significance to the plot is not so great that the whole thing couldn't be done without. For reasons, Glory B and Jake accompany Kelsey to assume control of the store and effectively thwart the plans of Dunnett and Biggs. They discover that the Victorian tat, unsellable to British consumers, is very sellable to American tourists, and the store begins to turn around its fortunes, even prompting a visit from Princess Diana that Big and Co. attempt to ruin in various ways, such as putting superglue on the seat of a toy car, putting 2 horse toys in a compromising position, and an anti-royal banner that Dunner is in the process of removing when the Americans spot him and accuse him of being a communist or an anarchist in a scene that outstays its welcome by several pages. Miss Marchant, the Holmes enthusiast, notices that Kelsey looks like Basil Rathbone, who played Holmes for a while, and she's naturally smitten. Mr. Big makes various menaces towards Dunnett, and lawyers discover that if the store makes a profit, then it will revert to the ownership of the church and solve the book's plot. However, the Victorian stock has sold so well that the store has none left. They begin instead selling American tat, but nobody wants it. This too will solve the book's plot, though Dunnett will likely pay with his life. However, in order to force the issue and ensure the store turns a profit, Mr. Biggs turns to another gangster, the Chinaman, an Australian, and borrows enough money to hire market research firms to buy the new tat as quickly as they can ship it in. The haste causes a problem and Kelsey buys in a shipment of marijuana chewing gum. We are at this point 2/3 of the way through the book, and Carrott is trying hard to make it work, and the labour literally plods off the page. Briefly skipping ahead for the best example of this, we find Mr. Biggs briefing his team on the latest developments. The little bird has told me that Alfie the Flea has skipped off down the Costa del Sol, with most of the profits accruing from the activities of Sun Quick Timeshare Apartments Limited, one of my little business ventures which, as you will remember, regrettably had to be wound up following some unwelcome attention from Roger Cook. At the bottom of the page, the same briefing is finally wrapped up with this. I propose that we dispatch Mr. Mangle and Rupert to the sunny climes of the Andalusian coastline with the objective of locating Alfie and turning his knackers into paella. And the horrors here are numerous. 2/3 of the way through a book is a very strange place to start making your villain look weak and stupid. It's a strange place too to be introducing previously unmentioned plot points, but especially if you don't do anything with them. None of this is relevant to anything that occurs in the book in any way beyond emasculating the threat. Despite this line, Mangle and Rupert don't even go anywhere. Why is this page in the book? Back to Mrs. Marchant. Suspicious of Dunnett, she follows the bishop to a strip club and fleetingly goes undercover to discover Mr. Big blackmailing him. The book sets up the idea that if the evidence she removes is discovered missing, there will be big consequences. But she pays a cleaning lady to return them and the subplot is immediately over. Glory B and Kelsey learn that the store is not allowed to make money and that on January the 1st will revert to the church's ownership, even though the bishop is now out of the way because Marchmont's evidence has been revealed to the press. They decide to steal the current profits, stuff it into the dwarfs in the store's Santa's grotto. But the drunk Santa starts giving out marijuana gum to the kids instead of presents, and they all get high and chaos ensues. The store catches on fire, burning most of the money, though Dunnett escapes with some. The 3 Americans with Judith Marchant head to America and plan to open a store selling Conan Doyle memorabilia from her collection. Dunnett is working in a care home and marries one of the residents, learning that she is in fact his mum. Mr. Big and Co. are in hiding from the Chinaman. As plots go, it is ridiculous, though in a farce like this that would lend itself to both definitions of the word and ought to be a strength, but it really isn't. The book is far too long, at least twice the length its premise warrants. In truth, any of the various threads introduced, Alfred Knowles attempting to kill himself and frame Eric, the visit of the royal family, or a Brewster's Millions dash to bankrupt the store before the profit situation is discovered, might well have worked better on their own if developed as the singular plot. Instead, the book feels like somebody wrote story ideas on buckshot and then unloaded both barrels into a stack of paper. It is ridiculous, but it's a ridiculous mess. Significant issues are caused because Carrott is desperate for everybody to be weird and zany and have a quirky backstory and personality issues that there isn't any normality to contrast it with. The closest shop contains to an everyman is Jake, who really shouldn't have been in it at all. Kelsey, Marchant or Dunnett should have been the Tim or Jim, whose sardonic and horrified eye relates the chaos to the reader, but they are just lost in the morass of nutcases. I'm surprised because Carrott worked in retail and has named his fictional London store after the one he worked in. You'd think he'd have quite a few anecdotes that would make for a much more grounded take on the genre. For example, this observation, "It was a stock-taking nightmare that every year took 18 months to complete," is exactly the sort of observational comedy that works beautifully in so familiar circumstances. It's a shame that Carrott chooses to relate it in this way, which is rather more long-winded and awkward. It was a stock-taking nightmare that every year took 18 months to complete, so nobody ever really knew how much of whatever it is there was. The early going isn't good. The book thinks it's a Python-esque menagerie, but doesn't realise that far more people prefer the Holy Grail or Life of Brian to the more clip show style of The Meaning of Life, and this reads more like the latter. There's so much potential here, but blasting a random assortment of ideas at the page is not the way to go, not in any style. Glory B is a terrible character, really bad. Her low light is bullying an old man out of a cab into the rain with the threat that she'll make false rape claims against him. She's a cliched supermodel attorney who has no business accompanying Kelsey & Co. anyway, but she hangs around performing no function. She changes her dialogue and clothing to match whatever movie she's watched lately, swapping from Legal Eagle to Rambo clone, but without actually doing anything with it. Why turn her into Rambo without having her perform some sort of relevant violence? Another character in a vast cast the novel could simply do without. Her function in the plot is to discover why there are a number of payments being made to an American bank account from the department store when those payments cease on the death of Alfred Knowles. This leads her to learn about Kelsey and that he is the heir to the Knowles business, but none of this needs to be in the book. Knowles himself doesn't die until page 82 of 340. That's a really long wait to put your plot into motion. But here Eric thinks he's won, and Miss Marchman is deeply suspicious. Cutting everything between page 82 and page 146, when Kelsey arrives at the store, would be an exercise in mercy. And it's another 20 pages after his arrival before Kelsey's introduced to Dunnett as the store's new owner. You could quite literally go from Knowles dying, his death being ruled an accident, Dunnett celebrates, next chapter, in he comes to work, and there is Kelsey. But you have to get to Kelsey far quicker than the story does, because it doesn't have a single likeable character, and he's our best hope. Dunnett is the protagonist, but he's a creepy lech, a thief and a weasel. He's not even likeable as an anti-hero. The saving grace for as close to one as Shop has is that Jasper Carrott is a comedian. He simply couldn't write 343 pages without landing a few jokes, and in that regard, despite all the problems with plot and character, it will raise a chuckle or two. Not nearly enough to warrant its length, and don't expect more than one joke to land for every two that whiff, but while I wonder what percentage of people would actually manage it, it's hard to read cover to cover and not laugh at least once. Rupert, the grammar corrector, is a painful read. Again, he does not influence the plot, and his correcting of people's spelling or pronunciation is neither funny or relevant. Just cut him out. Dunnett, talking about the store, says, "Whether or not it's a nice place is a matter of controversy." "Excuse me," said Rupert, "I think you'll find it's pronounced controversy, the stress being on the versy, not the trov." There probably is a joke in this line, but Carrott has made it all the way to publication without really finding the best one. Richard Branson would be turning virgins around faster than an Armenian marriage broker. Remembering the late 80s and 90s as a time when politicians caught disgracing themselves would actually do the right thing and resign, this line would have been quite topical and fairly amusing. The Beehive harboured a cross-section of perverts whose dubious practices were rarely equalled outside the House of Commons. But when you effectively use the same line again, is it because you forgot, or because the laughter was just dying down from the first run? He's a bishop whose sexual appetites would disgrace a politician. Carrott does have a nice turn of phrase here and there, foreshadowing the discovery of Mr. Knowles' body with this. Normally Alfred Bowles would not be seen dead at the Beehive on sales day. This was to be his one exception. But the best comedy in the book is far too rare, the sort of wry observation on British bureaucracy. This is a good example of it. Ronald Knowles had escaped action in the war by convincing an army medical officer he was allergic to cordite potatoes and corned beef. He was promptly called up and put in charge of catering at the Aldershot gun range. This is the sort of stuff that Adams and Pratchett did so well, and retail with idiot managers and meddling customers really lends itself to that same sort of send-up. Likewise, the introduction of the Americans allows for our two cultures to be compared and contrasted. We're so close in so many ways and so different in just as many others that there's almost an endless supply of observations to make. The novel focuses on loud tourists and our mutual exchange of unwanted junk, but it misses the opportunity to do more like this. Jake buys a British car and thinks that if he takes it home and makes a few modifications that it would make a perfectly good lawnmower. More of that sort of thing would have been very welcome. The fact that the accountant walks slowly and the disabled lift operator moves the lift slowly, that's the same joke twice. It's funny neither time, and it's the reason why this book is double its optimal length. In conclusion, Shop or A Star is Born is far too long. A scattergun approach to plot does not actually equal a plot, but it results in various subplots coming and going without any great impact or the development they deserved. I think that there might be one or two, perhaps even three decent books in here if they were. The visit of royalty to a snobbish and dysfunctional store, for example, sounds like a great episode of Are You Being Served? And that show proves that there is magic in retail, a situation we've all experienced from one side or another. The subject of so many shows and stories, but Carrott just takes it too far, takes it to the unrecognisable and removes the relatable everyman. In fact, it removes any likeable character, but so many of the characters here are one note or less, or worse, irrelevant. It is extreme bizarreness for the sake of not having anything truly inspired to write about. The book's one positive is an occasional line that does land, but from a consistently successful comedian like Jasper Carrott, it's only disappointing. Thanks for watching, like and sub for more like this.